Everyone thought I was a piece of, you know what I mean. But in reality, everything I did was for him. When his mother died, he was 12 and furious. I poured my days into him like mortar between loose bricks, holding us together by routine and stubbornness. Mornings were algebra on napkins. Nights were biographies that smelled of library dust and coffee. I taught him to change a tire, to bake a crust that didn't fall apart, to look people in the eye when he promised them something. I kept him moving. Science fairs, debate tournaments, summer programs I hunted down and talked him into. I told him the world runs on people who refuse to be ordinary. We had little, or that's what he believed. I wore the same threadbare coat for 15 winters and drove a dented sedan older than him. We stood in the back at university lectures where professors mistook me for a janitor. He liked that story. He liked believing he had done it all from nothing. I never corrected him. By 29, he'd built an app that turned common sense into a subscription, a polished platform matching workers to tasks, selling convenience packaged as empathy. Investors loved the pitch. Users loved the ease. Labor advocates hated the shadows it cast, but hatred, like thunder, can be ignored until it isn't. He liked to call himself self-made. That was his favorite myth. He didn't know about the wire I laid under his road, the scholarship calls I made under different names, the anonymous donor who covered the camp fee, the angel check that appeared when he needed runway and quietly asked for no board seat. He never knew the landlord who gave him a break on his first office lease answered to a holding company owned by a man in a threadbare coat who liked working in a garden and listening. He didn't know I read every one of his decks at midnight and planted questions in rooms through someone else's mouth so he could knock them out of the park. He didn't know because I needed to know something bigger. When he brought the nursing home brochure, he folded it twice and slid it across the table like a card he couldn't wait to play. "Dad," he said, smoothing the paper, "you'll be comfortable there. Full-time care. The best." "I didn't know I needed that," I said. "You forget your pills. You fall asleep with the stove on. I can't be worrying about you while we negotiate the Series D." He'd rehearsed the casual cruelty. It came out neat. "I can pay for a nurse here," I said. "We can make the house safe." "They're professionals," he said, tapping his phone. "And the optics. Well, we'll arrange something nice." Optics. He passed me the pen and watched me sign as if I were consenting to a haircut. He kissed the top of my head the way you pat a dog you're rehoming. That afternoon a van with a cursive logo came for me. The driver's name tag said Carl. He whistled while buckling me in, and I asked him to take the long way so I could see the river. He obliged. People usually do when you ask, like it might be the last time. The home sat on a hill, all glass and plants and deliberately cheerful art. The door chimed. An admissions coordinator with bright lipstick clasped my hand as if I were breakable. My room had a window facing a willow tree. A button lifted the bed. The walls smelled like lemon and starch. His assistant sent over a framed photo of us from a decade ago. He was 20 and hungry, and I was older and certain. I set it on the dresser facing the corner. The staff thought I was grieving. I was, but not for the reason they guessed. He called that first night, fizzing through free champagne. "You settled in?" "Like a rock at low tide." Ha! He was already elsewhere. "Listen, I won't make it this week. We're doing a partnership with the city. Big announcement. You'll see it. I see everything," I said, and meant it. The home had routines I put on like a costume. I learned the aides' names and their kids' names. I found the quiet corners at dawn where the TV didn't talk and the coffee didn't taste like punishment. And I watched, without turning on the news in my room. I had other channels. At noon, a man I'd known for 40 years came to fix the fish tank filter. His badge said maintenance. In other rooms, he'd signed more zeros than he could comfortably count. Late afternoons, the woman who watered the plant by my door told me about her ESL class. She was also the best forensic accountant I'd ever hired. In the evenings, a volunteer read the paper aloud. She ran a boutique PR firm shaped like a whisper. The willow outside my window had been planted by a charity I'd founded with 4 friends. The plaque sat on the far side of the trunk where visitors rarely walked. My son never saw it. He visited twice that first month, both times with a camera hovering at a respectful distance. During his second visit, the social worker updated the standard contacts and powers of attorney. He nodded through the explanation while tapping replies, and he signed. He didn't ask what the clauses meant. He didn't look at me to see if I was comfortable. Months earlier, I'd filed my standing medical directive and caretaker papers, dry forms nobody reads closely, with an additional condition: the family caretaker precedence. It required the designated caretaker to visit at least once every 2 weeks to retain authority. If not, authority shifted to the secondary caretaker listed only as Sage. He failed. It shifted. I hadn't picked Sage for irony. It was the oldest trust in our family, formed in a conference room before he was born, when I realized how money fossilizes people and decided my boy should know win before wealth. My son kept running his company as if the world would rubber stamp each step. He had a gift for telling a better story than the facts could support. He partnered with the city to dispatch his workers. He called them partners, to shovel snow for seniors, then told investors he was unlocking civic resilience. He looked good on panels and candid in podcasts, calling himself a kid who coded his way out of a cold house. Asked about his father, he winked at the camera. He's proud in his own way. Old school. Meanwhile, the board was changing shape. It started small. A fund took a stake here, a family office there. A sovereign vehicle bought secondary shares from early employees feeling squeezed by an options refresh. None of those entities were on his enemy map. He looked for giants. He didn't look for roots. On Thursdays, the home served lemon cake. On a Thursday after rain, I sat by the window. A new resident, an old math teacher with precise hair, took the seat across from me. She told me she loved equations because they didn't lie. "What if the variables do?" I asked. "They can't," she said, and cut her cake into squares. That night, my accountant, addressed now to the secondary caretaker, sent a packet with 2 parts. First, my will, unchanged, charitable funds, scholarships, and a modest trust for my son, contingent on continued personal stewardship. Second, a diagram of the company he believed he owned. He owned Common. He had sold pieces of freedom at every round. A bridge loan he called friendly carried a ratchet. A safe he liked for saving on fees hid a right of first refusal that could be used with speed. The Series C lead had a key person clause that triggered not only by death, but by extended incapacity or neglect of family duty. People raised eyebrows when I'd proposed that language years ago. I raised theirs back with a donation that put 3 social workers in a clinic on the South Side. People prefer a world where checks balance sins. It rarely works that cleanly, but the gesture greases hinges. I didn't plan his downfall. That part matters. I took my hands away and let gravity do its work. It began at the gala. He rented the botanical garden and draped it in light like jewelry. Cameras skittered along hedges. He posed under a white arch with a city council member and pledged a percentage of future profits to elder care equity. The phrase was mine, borrowed from an essay he never read. I stood in back with a cane I didn't need and watched him speak about kindness. He didn't see me. Someone else did, a journalist with an eye like a needle who loved pulling threads. She remembered a piece about his company shaving the hours of disabled workers and asked off stage whether his father was there. He said yes. He lied. Not maliciously, just inconvenient to say no. The lie made print. Print landed on the desk of a state investigator who'd been squinting at his contracts. The investigator's father lived in a different home, one not draped in light, and he was starting to resent the word partner when it meant no benefits and a broken back. The mid-level crisis arrived like a courier, a lawsuit from workers claiming their hours were shaved by an algorithm the company labeled efficiency. He could have settled early, apologized loudly, extended benefits generously, and survived. Instead, he called them edge cases. A PR blog he barely read used the phrase statistical noise. He let it stand. Noise became heat. Heat woke up other nodes, state agencies, city auditors, tax boards. His general counsel began sleeping in her office. She was good. She wasn't magic. He came to see me on a Sunday, the first snow holding. No cameras. He looked older than his photos. He sat on the bed like a boy told to apologize without knowing how to mean it. "Dad," he said, "they're coming after us." "It's political. Politics is a story people tell about power," I said. "It's all political." "I could use your," he searched for a word, "your vote of confidence. Maybe do an interview. Talk about where we came from." "Where did we come from?" I asked. "From nothing," he said, too fast. I turned toward the willow. The plaque on the far side caught light. "I didn't raise you in nothing," I said. "I raised you in enough." He didn't understand. He hadn't for a long time. It wasn't about money. On Tuesday, the board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't on the calendar, but after caretaker authority shifted, the chair invited me. She'd managed risk for a bank that didn't survive 2008 and had learned what happens when men prefer stories to ratios. She led with calm and asked two questions that mattered. What did you know, and when did you choose to ignore it? He danced. He was good at dancing. The room didn't move with him. The key person clause came up. The phrase extended incapacity or neglect of family duty was read aloud. He laughed. "That's absurd." I put my father in the best place in the state. The chair asked for visit logs. The social worker provided them. 2 visits in 8 weeks, both coordinated with a brand photographer. She also provided the paperwork acknowledging the shift to the secondary caretaker. He stared at the signature under SAGE. "Who is that?" he asked. "I am," I said, walking in. He looked like someone watching wallpaper peel back to reveal a door. I hadn't dressed for drama. A sweater, the old coat, a little theater on a day that didn't need it. The cane tapped a rhythm that settled my hands. The chair nodded to me. Several directors nodded deeper than politeness. They knew me by other names. "Dad," he said. The word curled like paper in heat. "I wanted to see what you'd do," I said. "Without the net. Without invisible hands. I wanted to know if you'd look back when the elevator doors closed." "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're my father. And you're my son." He reached for something steady and found none. "What have you done?" "Very little," I said, true enough. "I formed a trust and gave it the shares I purchased years ago. I let a clause you agreed to do what it was written to do. I introduced your board to someone who has watched cycles longer than you've been alive." I told the truth when asked, "What truth?" His voice edged into the tone he used on underperforming directors. "That you put me away," I said. "Not because I needed care, but because I was inconvenient." He opened his mouth. The chair raised a hand. "We are not adjudicating family grievances," she said. "We are preserving a company. The optics of abandonment are poor. The ethics are worse. We cannot survive the storm you invited with hubris. He'd never liked the Greeks. The vote wasn't close. He was removed as CEO pending review. The key person trigger launched a change in control his lawyers had skimmed. The supervoting shares he'd admired in someone else's case converted under conditions he couldn't recite. The ratchet turned. The safe became a wall. He swore then, the kind of word you use when your cheek hits tile. He shouted about betrayal and blood and loyalty. I let the words move through the room and settle. Anger loses shape when you don't catch it. He left with his jaw set like a door slammed in winter. That night, the journalist called. "Did you intend to humiliate your son?" "No," I said. "I intended to teach him the cost of treating people like scenery. I didn't choose the price." More bills arrived. The state investigator unspooled the wage-shaving algorithm into a very public display of arithmetic. The company settled in a way that spared it the death penalty, but not the scar. Investors installed a new CEO who smiled like a bridge. Workers got back pay and benefits. My son got a letter from the Attorney General on paper that smelled like courtrooms, a temporary restraining order limiting his access to systems, and a subpoena. His assistant resigned. Friends who loved him called me. Some yelled, some begged. One asked me to remember he was still the boy who cried in the dark kitchen the night his mother died. "I do," I said. "That's why this hurts enough to matter." He met me in a park months later. We talked like two men on opposite banks of a river whose bridge had washed out. He said he understood now that optics are mirrors that eventually face inward. He said he still hated me for making the lesson public. "I didn't make anything public you didn't pose for," I said. He asked if there was a way back. I told him there's always a way back to decency. Wealth may not be waiting at that gate. He didn't like that part. People accustomed to keys don't love gates that open by hand. He didn't come on Thursdays. He never learned the aides' names. He never called the city office that tracks home care shortages. He volunteered once at a food bank and posted about it twice. He tried humility like a jacket and found it itchy. Late in summer, a story broke about a venture he'd backed, an app for microloans that charged fees hungry enough to have teeth. The journalist who loved thread pulling wrote it. She asked for comment. "Ask him," I said. "Ask if he'd sell it to his mother." She put that line at the end. He called me hoarse that night. That wasn't fair. "No lesson feels fair until you admit you needed it," I said. He didn't speak to me for a long time. Then, last winter, a short message. I visited Mrs. Valdez. Thursdays, Mrs. Valdez had been the aide who laughed like bells. She'd left to care for her mother and needed rides on icy days. He learned to drive slow. He carried groceries and kept his voice down near the oxygen machine. He didn't post about it. I checked. As for the ending people want, blood or cuffs, it wasn't that. It fit him better. He stayed rich for a while. Wealth has momentum. Fame is skittish. The glossy panels stopped calling. Podcasts grew curious, then cool. He settled with the state, lost a piece to plaintiffs with receipts, and traded the penthouse for quieter addresses. He learned to cook eggs. He learned to walk streets where nobody asked for a selfie. He did not learn to show up unannounced on Thursdays. He wrote once more. "Is this what you wanted?" I sat in my kitchen, the old coat on the chair back, the garden light on the counter, and wrote the only answer that felt true. "I wanted you to become a man who wouldn't put his father away because it made the photographs cleaner," I wrote. "Everything else is equilibrium finding itself." He didn't reply. Mrs. Valdez called that Thursday to say a young man had brought oranges and a shy smile. He fixed the wobble in her kitchen table and left before the soup finished warming. She asked if he had family nearby. "Sort of," he said, and looked at his hands like they belonged to someone he was learning to respect. In late afternoon the willow throws long shade. On certain days the wind lifts the leaves just so and the plaque flashes, blinding for a second. That seems fair. We live with the things we plant. We learn from the shadow. We make room for the brightness when it comes. And we try, if we're lucky, to be decent when no one is looking.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.